All right, today we're diving into one of the most controversial and maybe one of the most exciting frontiers in modern psychiatry. We're talking about taking drugs that are usually known for abuse and seeing if they can actually treat one of the toughest mental health conditions out there. This is a story about a high-stakes gamble, a story of huge risks, incredible rewards, and a desperate hunt for new answers.
Let's just put the central question right out there. Could a party drug really treat bipolar disorder? It sounds like something straight out of science fiction, doesn't it? But this is a question being asked in very serious clinical research right now. We're going to be talking about stimulants, ketamine, even classic psychedelics. So could a substance you'd normally associate with a nightclub actually hold a key to treatment? Let's dig in.
And before we go any further, I just want you to look at this number, 61%. That is the lifetime risk for a person with bipolar I disorder to also have a substance use disorder. So this isn't just some random connection. It's a massive piece of the puzzle. The relationship between these substances and bipolar disorder is super complex and, as you can see, deeply, deeply intertwined.
So, you're probably wondering, why are scientists even looking at these drugs in the first place? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Treating bipolar disorder is just incredibly difficult. For way too many people, the treatments we have now just don't cut it. And that's forced researchers to get creative, to look way outside the box, and explore every single possibility, no matter how unconventional it might seem on the surface.
First up on our list, stimulants. We're talking about drugs like methylphenidate, you probably know it as Ritalin, and amphetamines. And what's so fascinating here is this central balancing act, this dilemma. Can these drugs help with other related conditions without triggering the one thing everyone is terrified of, a manic episode? It's a real clinical tightrope walk.
Now, to really get this, we've got to be super clear about something. Stimulants are being studied for two very different reasons when it comes to bipolar disorder. On one side, you have their use for treating ADHD that's happening at the same time. And on the other, they're being looked at as a kind of add-on therapy, something to help lift the heavy fog of bipolar depression that won't respond to other treatments. Two very different goals, each with its own set of pros and cons.
And the overlap between ADHD and bipolar disorder is huge. We're talking about roughly 1 in every 6 adults with bipolar also having ADHD. And it goes the other way, too. So this isn't some rare edge case, It's a very common reality that doctors see all the time, which makes finding a safe way to treat both a massive priority.
And this brings us right to the heart of the problem. We know for a fact that if you have bipolar disorder and you don't treat your ADHD, your outcomes are going to be worse. But the number one tool for treating ADHD, stimulants, carries this very well-known risk of tipping someone over into mania. So what's a clinician supposed to do?
Well, the official guidance on this is crystal clear. All the major authorities, like the Canadian Network for Mood and Anxiety Treatments, or CANMAT, they all say the exact same thing. Step 1 is always, and I mean always, to get the person's mood stable first, using a primary medication like lithium. Only after that's been achieved can you even think about carefully adding a stimulant.
And the data shows that this context is everything. When you use methylphenidate with a mood stabilizer, studies find no increased risk of a manic switch. But if you use it alone, whoa, the risk of mania just skyrockets by almost 7 times. One study that looked at patients who weren't stable found a jaw-dropping 40% rate of mania. That mood stabilizer isn't a suggestion, it's the safety net.
Okay, so let's move on to our next candidate, ketamine. Now, if the story with stimulants is all about that careful, delicate balancing act, the story of ketamine is all about one thing and one thing only: speed. This is a dissociative anesthetic that's being studied for its unbelievably fast antidepressant effects.
So let's be clear what we're talking about here. Ketamine's day job, so to speak, was as a medical anesthetic. But of course, it's also famous as a recreational club drug, known for causing these really intense, out-of-body experiences, what people sometimes call a K-hole. And it's really this dual identity that makes it so promising and, so controversial in the world of psychiatry.
Now, why is the psychiatric world so interested in it? Well, because of numbers like this one. In a major trial looking at treatment-resistant bipolar depression, a whopping 79% of patients had a positive response after they received ketamine. That is just a stunning number for a group of people who have often tried everything else and gotten nowhere.
And here's the part that is just completely revolutionary. That antidepressant effect, it wasn't felt days or weeks later. It started to kick in to become noticeable in just 40 minutes. 40!
To give you some perspective, most traditional antidepressants can take 4, 5, even 6 weeks to even start working. And this is why that speed is such a potential game changer. For somebody who is deep in a severe bipolar depressive episode, maybe even having suicidal thoughts, waiting weeks for a medication to hopefully work can feel like an absolute eternity. Ketamine offers the potential for almost immediate relief, and that could be, quite literally, life-saving.
Of course, there's a huge question that probably just popped into your head. If you give a drug that's known to cause symptoms that look like psychosis to someone with bipolar disorder, aren't you just asking for trouble? I mean, what about the risk of flipping them into a manic or a psychotic state?
Well, what's so interesting is that the evidence we have so far, and to be fair, it's only from 3 major trials, is surprisingly reassuring. The rates of people switching into mania were actually very low. And get this, in one study, the group that got the placebo had a higher switch rate than the group that got ketamine. The main side effect was just that feeling of dissociation you'd expect, and it faded pretty quickly.
Okay, that brings us to our final, and by far our most speculative category, classic psychedelics. Things like psilocybin, which is the active compound in magic mushrooms, and LSD. You know, if ketamine research is in its teenage years, then psychedelic research for bipolar disorder, it's still an infant. This is truly the edge of the map. And here is the single most important thing you need to know about this. The modern, rigorous clinical trials that are studying psychedelics, they have almost all systematically excluded anyone with a personal or even a family history of bipolar disorder. The fear of triggering a manic episode has made it a strict no-go zone for researchers, at least for now.
So what does that leave us with? Well, basically a messy patchwork of low-quality evidence. On one hand, you've got these clinical case reports that clearly describe instances where psychedelics triggered mania. But on the other hand, you have these online surveys where, yeah, about a third of users say their symptoms got worse. But, paradoxically, most of those same people said the experience was ultimately helpful. It's confusing and it's conflicting.
This core fear, this main worry, it actually has a name. It's called an affective switch. It's the risk that any treatment for depression, especially one that messes with the serotonin system, like psychedelics do, could overshoot its target and launch a person straight into hypomania or even full-blown mania. This is the absolute central safety concern.
So after looking at all of this, stimulants, ketamine, psychedelics, what's the big takeaway? Well, it really boils down to a 3-step mantra of extreme caution. 1. Prioritize mood stability above all else, period. 2. Every single treatment decision has to be individualized, carefully weighing that person's specific risks. And 3. We have to be humble and admit that for all of these things, we have a serious lack of long-term evidence. Ultimately, this entire field of research is just a massive tightrope walk. On one side of the rope, you have this profound, potentially life-changing ability to help people who have run out of options. And on the other side, you have the very real, very serious risk of making things so much worse. And that leaves us with the big, overarching question. These are incredibly powerful substances, and medicine is slowly, cautiously rediscovering them. As we all move forward, as patients, as doctors, as a society, how do we navigate this new landscape? How do we possibly balance the profound hope that these drugs offer with the absolute, non-negotiable need for caution?